Adam, you want to give me a countdown?
Good
Evening, everyone. My name is Scott Bruce. I'm the business administrator here at SAU 19. And I want to welcome you to a question and answer session as a result of the reopening plans that the SAU has discussed over the last couple of days. So we did get quite a few emails from most of you in the community. I think we got about 50 emails. I just wanted to let you know that we're going to try to go through the majority of questions that we received. So some of our answers, they are not going to be very long because we want to try to get through as many.
My name is Scott Brooks.
And so I do like to introduce who will be our panel for this evening. So Adam, if you could switch to gallery view. We have Superintendent Brian Bulkey, Assistant Superintendent Mary Claire Barry.
I just wanted to let
We have Assistant Principal of Goffstown High School, Kim McCann. Principal of Mountain View Middle School, Wendy Kohler. Principal of Bartlett Elementary School, Jerry St. Chalet. Principal of New Boston Central School, Tori Underwood. And last but certainly not least, the principal of Maple Ave, Suzanne Pishka. All right, so we're going to get started with our first question. And the first question is, why did the schools choose Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday as the days for the hybrid model? And I'm going to turn that over to, I think it's Wendy. You're going to answer that one, and maybe Suzanne?
Sure, why don't I start, Scott? Thank you. So in looking at figuring out how our hybrid model was going to look, we had to think about not only the middle school level, but down to pre-K right through grade 12. And in looking at a model that would best fit our students, we thought seeing them in an intermittent basis rather than 2 days in a row would help us be able to gain information on how our students are doing with their work, if they're mastering subjects before we move on to new ones, and for concepts. We also wanted to make sure that work was being completed and could perhaps catch students up if they're falling behind more quickly, rather than if a student was going, for example, Monday and Tuesday, not seeing them again until the following Monday would be quite a long time to be able to see them. So that went into the decision making of why we chose Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday. Suzanne, did I miss anything there?
I would add at the elementary level that on the Monday, they would have in-person direct instruction, and the follow-up at home would be on Tuesday, where they would have application and guided practice. So it's important that those two follow each other.
Instruction and the follow-up.
All right, so now we're going to turn to some of the questions that we have on Facebook Live. We are unable to look at some of the questions on YouTube, but I am monitoring the ones on Facebook. So this one comes from Maria Keller, and Brian, I'm going to punt this one to you. Will masks be required for students and staff?
Good evening, everyone. So I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to do this with all of you tonight. Mr. Gross, I think we were also going to do a very brief intro, a brief overview of the model that we will be opening schools with. So why don't I start with that?
Sure.
And as part of that, I'll answer the mask question, because I know that this is on a lot of people's minds. So let me start with just a brief overview. So we've had a busy week, everybody. We've had a busy several months, actually, but over this week, we had an SAU school board meeting on Monday evening, followed by a Goffstown school board meeting, and we had a New Boston school board meeting last evening. So at this point, both school boards have accepted the administration's recommendation of a hybrid model in return at the fall. But I'd like to say it's hybrid with a choice. We're going to give any family who wants it a fully remote model so that they can stay connected with our schools, and if and when conditions are perhaps perceived as more safe for families, that they'd be able to return, or if there's a vaccine or something of that nature. So we're going to have a hybrid model. This is going to be, and the presentation that we gave within a hybrid model, we had 3 different phases. And if you think about phase 1 being more restrictive, phase 2 being a little less restrictive, and phase 3 being a little less restrictive still, we are opening in a phase 2 model, with the exception of Glen Lake School, which will be in a phase 1 model because of the age of our youngsters. We have 3, 4, and 5-year-old children there. So within our hybrid model, Students will attend in person all day sessions 2 days a week. So students, as Mrs. Kohler just shared, will be in a Monday, Wednesday, or a Tuesday, Thursday cohort, and all students will have a remote day on Friday, but that day will have synchronous lessons and requirements for students to be doing in live time like they were in school. So within that hybrid model, we're going to have the ability to move, to flex, to be fluid as different public health conditions change. So that will allow us to change our model, but to have it all figured out ahead of time. Let me talk a little bit about facilities. We will have a significantly enhanced cleaning and sanitation processes and protocols, all of which will be consistent with recommendations that we're receiving from the CDC. We continue to evaluate the air exchange in all of our buildings. One of the benefits of having a slightly older infrastructure in our schools is that we have air exchange systems that pull 100% outside air in our buildings. Some of the newer heating systems pull only a small amount and they temper the air. They do that for efficiency and energy conservation so that you're not constantly heating air that's coming from the outside that obviously in the winter it's going to be cold. So we're in good shape with respect to that, and that was part of the presentation that we had the other evening. From a health management perspective, we're going to have some enhanced services and protocols from our nurse's office, including protocols for students coming into the building. We will not be doing temperature checks at the door at this point in time. So that may be something, Scott, that might be of interest to people. We are going to rely on parents to go through a process and to evaluate the potential symptoms as well as the potential exposure of COVID. So we will be requiring staff and students to do that. For logistics, we recognize that there are significant concerns for our faculty and staff as well as our community around childcare. Mr. Gross, you in particular have worked really closely with Bob Kenny from the YMCA, and we've worked with them to put together some options for families that need childcare on the off days that kids aren't in schools. With respect to transportation, and then I'll get into the masks, Scott, we will be providing full busing services to our students from K to 12. One of the things that we evaluated within our planning was the elimination of high school busing. People might be surprised to hear, Scott, that high school transportation is not required in the state of New Hampshire. So we did consider eliminating that and potentially increasing the number of elementary and middle school runs. At this point, we are not making that decision, as we know that that would be hardship for many families and would really create an equity gap that we think is unfair. So let me talk about the masks. Yes, masks will be required. 100% yes. So I want to be crystal clear on this for our families and for our staff. There is no question to me that masks are an effective tool in the mitigation of the community spread of COVID-19. This is not a political discussion for me. This is, and actually not even a discussion for me. Masks are required. And let's talk a little more specifically about that, Scott. Students riding school buses will be required to wear masks the entire time that they are on school buses. We will be asking parents to help at bus stops to make sure that kids are appropriately socially distanced and that kids are masked when they are interacting with one another. Getting on the bus, masks will be required the entire duration that they are on the bus. We are going to limit transportation to approximately 26 students on buses, 1 student per seat. And the only exception for that will be if we have siblings. So siblings will be able to sit together. Kids will have assigned seats, and we will make sure that buses are cleaned and sanitized between runs. So a little more about masks within the school setting. Anytime.
Yeah, Brian, one of the questions regarding masks that we saw on the Facebook feed was, what about during recess?
Well, so let me start with them getting off the bus and entering the building, and then we'll get to recess. So getting off the school bus or coming into the building if parents are driving, which, by the way, I am asking parents, if you are able to drive your child, please do so. We want to eliminate as many kids on buses so that bus runs can be lighter and they can be quicker for everyone involved. So any family that has the means and the capacity to drive their children to school, we are respectfully asking you to do so. So Scott, to get back to the masks, you're going to come into the building. Anytime you are traveling within the school building, you're moving, you're walking, you're going from the parking lot into the school, into your classroom, masks are required the entire time. When students are seated in their classrooms and they are socially distanced, at least 6 feet apart, they will be able to take their masks off, but I say with teacher discretion. So we will be developing protocols and expectations, and each school will have some new elements that will be added to their student handbook, Scott, so that we are crystal clear on the mask expectations. Students who might have medical needs or might have any kind of a unique respiratory situation that masks could be a medical challenge for them, we will work with you on an individual basis. Students who refuse to wear masks will not be allowed in school. So I want to make sure that's clear. This is not a choice. I've heard from parents that have said to me that they will not have their kids attend a school where they have to wear masks. Respectfully, that saddens me, but we would be able to offer you in a fully online school experience, in which case you would not have to wear a mask, obviously. So go to recess, Scott. When kids are going to recess, they will be masked. When kids are outside at recess, I think this is one we're going to have to focus a little more on with some protocols, because I would not want to say right now that I would permit students not to wear masks on the playground and then have them clustering and grouping up and they're in close proximity. So we will work on protocols if students are appropriately socially distanced, perhaps playing a game or in some kind of a structured activity with adult supervision. It may be, I would say maybe, not it is, but it may be permissible to take them off. We want to really start to get kids into good habits with respect to wearing masks. A few other pointers and tips I might give to parents. I would encourage you to have your child wearing a mask now. You want them to get used to it. You want to find a mask that fits them properly, that is the proper type of material. We're talking about regular cloth masks. Those are fine. You do not have to wear anything fancy. You don't have to go buy an expensive type of mask that you might get for a healthcare type of setting. So we want to work with people, but we do want to be clear, masks are indeed required. Mr.
All
Gross?
right. Yep, I'm going to start to move around on some different questions. So one question is, where will parents sign up for transportation? I'll take that one. You'll be getting a survey in the next couple of days, and that survey has multiple questions on it. And really what we're trying to gauge is, what selections parents are going to make for their students, and certainly whether you're going to be choosing the remote/connected learning, or whether or not you'll be selecting the hybrid model. We'll also be asking you about transportation. Will your child be regularly taking the bus? We do need that information, because we are, again, trying our very best to limit the number of students on buses as best we can. So now I'm going to go to Adam. If you wouldn't mind bringing up question number 29 on your list. And this one relates to the high school. And it's, Kim, this one would be to you, and I'm going to read it. Could you please elaborate on the ease, difficulty with individual students switching from the completely remote to hybrid options? Rumor has it that some GHS students are planning on remote for the first month, then assuming they can switch to hybrid, possibly not realizing the scheduling course options might be different.
Thanks, Scott. This is going to be one of the interesting challenges that the high school is going to face as we look at the fully remote option. And I know we've had a number of questions about that as well. We are in a scenario where until we have the numbers that come back on that student selection survey, we can't identify what courses we are going to be able to offer in a fully remote setting, just as we do the course selection in the spring. Then based on requests, we identify teaching staff that can match up with that. Once we have those numbers, we identify those students, their course requests, we're going to be able to build a completely separate schedule that is aligned with what the high school in-person schedule looks like, assign teachers to sections and assign kids into it. It may not be, though, that we can offer all of the same classes that we are offering in person. So our goal is to work with families to make those transitions throughout the year as their needs may change. However, it really is important to look at that second consideration as we think about it, because students who are choosing a fully remote option as school opens likely will not have a schedule that matches 100% with what is being offered in person and what that schedule would have looked like in the building. As such, it's going to be really important that when those transition points occur, students and families are working closely with their school counselors, and we will work with you to identify the best transition point. And in some cases, families may need to think about whether or not it makes sense to make that change after a month's time or with the close of a marking period. So we're going to continue to work closely with families, but there still are a lot of moving parts that we need to figure out in terms of schedules in both scenarios.
Kim, while you're there, there's been a lot of questions about Manchester School of Technology and concerns. We have a lot of students who attend MST. What can you share with MST as of now?
So we are waiting for the Manchester School District to hold their meeting on Monday night, August 10th. We will have more information about how they are going to be opening at that point. The most recent conversation that I had directly with the CTE director in Manchester was her confirming that it is our intent to send our students, and that is the case. So we are waiting to hear how things are going to unfold with them, but we have a draft schedule that has those kids who made that request all scheduled into MST and the programs that they requested.
Great, thanks, Kim. So Brian, I hope you quenched your thirst there. This one's coming to you. What are some of the triggers where you would go from phase 2 to phase 3? There's been a lot of folks on Facebook. We've got a lot of emails saying, what's the criteria? What metrics are you looking at as superintendent to go from phase 2 to phase 3?
Well, thank you, Scott. That's certainly a great question. I would begin this by saying something very similar to what I said at the school board meeting the other evening. I do think this is where public health should be providing more leadership and more direction to school districts. As a school administrator, we aren't necessarily experts in public health, and this is something that we have not been given clear directive on. But let me tell you a very specific list of variables that I'm looking at and considering. And Scott, I do plan to take this information and put it into kind of a chart or a graphic at a later point in time that might be a little more clear to people. But let me talk about the model of having the 3 different phases. So in phase 1, when we're looking at phase 1, we're looking at approximately a 25% occupancy. Phase 2, we're looking at approximately a 50% occupancy. And for phase 3, approximately a 75% occupancy of students. So we're looking at limited numbers of kids on campus. So in a phase 2 model, which is where we're opening, we're looking at about half of our kids in school on campus. Scott, I've got to remind everybody, and I think likely residents of Goffstown and New Boston know, our elementary schools are old and are overcrowded. So one of the biggest determining factors for us opening in a phase 2 model is this is simply the only way that we will be able to provide appropriate social distancing for all of our kids. And so we're looking at that. We're looking at the group size, Scott. So in the beginning of the pandemic, we know that there were no groups greater than 10. And excuse me, a little later, there are groups with a cohort group size of less than 50 and then over 50. So those are also variables. We have to consider our workforce, our staffing capacity. So if I have staff that are not able to work or unable to work because of health concerns, or maybe teachers and support staff who are ill, that likely will impact our ability to provide services. So the workforce, our staffing capacity, community transmission numbers. So we keep track of and work very, very closely with our partners in law enforcement and emergency response, our police and fire chiefs. We look at the numbers. I look at the numbers globally and internationally every day. We look at the numbers in New Hampshire. We look at the numbers in Hillsborough County. We look at the numbers in Goffstown and New Boston. We look at week over week increases. I'm looking at a percent positive of testing in New Hampshire of less than 5%. That's a recommendation from Johns Hopkins University. And New Hampshire, I think last week was about 2.4%. So New Hampshire has been doing a good job with that. Certainly, if we have positive cases within our schools, that would be a potential reason for us to move from a phase to a more restrictive phase. Testing capacity. The state of New Hampshire has to have accurate, timely access to testing. Contact tracing ability. The Department of Health and Human Services, we've seen overloaded earlier in the pandemic in New Hampshire, and we see them overloaded during the current pandemic in other parts of the country. But our state has to have the capacity for contact tracing. I look at the healthcare system capacity. We receive numbers from DHHS. We know how many people are hospitalized in New Hampshire from COVID. We know how many people are in the intensive care unit, and we know what the capacity of our healthcare system is. We look at travel restrictions being imposed by other states, the availability of personal protective equipment or PPE. So, Scott, those would be some of the variables that we continue to evaluate. And really, we're looking for more guidance from public health officials, but that's kind of a preliminary list of the things that I'm tracking and monitoring.
I appreciate that, Brian. We seem to be getting a lot of questions, both online as well as through the email, about what would be the staggered drop-off and pickup times. And I'm going to turn this one over to Suzanne, and certainly for Jerry at Bartlett and Tori at New Boston, and Wendy, you at Mountain View. We know that traffic there is always an issue, but we'll start with Suzanne. Are you having staggered pickup drop-off and pickup times?
Yes, Scott, that's what we plan to do, is to have parents drop off before buses. We're just waiting. We're trying to coordinate with Mountain View and Glen Lake to make sure that our time and their time coordinate for bus drop off. But yes, we're looking at staggering that. So anticipating that we'll have a lot of parents dropping off, and of course, we want them to drop their children off closest to where their classroom is. So there'll be some teaching and videos to share regarding the arrival and dismissal process, and where children will come into our building.
Tori, is there anything maybe that's, is it same in New Boston?
It is, Scott, pretty much. In the morning, we're going to actually have buses drop off first, because our buses then have to transfer into Goffstown for our middle school students, and we need to make sure that they arrive to their school on time. So we're going to have buses deliver first, and then parents will be able to drop off students. And our plan is to be able to utilize the entire front and back of school for drop off, and we will designate doors based on teachers' names. So students will be dropped off to the door closest to their classrooms. And in the afternoon, it will be in the reverse. Parents will pick up first, and then bussers will be picked up. Thanks,
Tori. Jerry, at Bartlett School, do you have a similar plan?
Yes, it's about the same as they mentioned too. We only have 2 buses, so ours is a lot easier. So we're going to have a staggered drop off in the morning starting at 8:15. And we will let you know, like Suzanne said, based upon the bus schedule, who would come first, parents or the buses. And in the afternoon, we'll have parents pick up first and walkers dismissed, and then the buses at the very tail end of that at 2:40.
And Wendy, what about Mountain View? We know there's always issues with traffic at Mountain View. I happen to live off Tibbetts Hill, so share with me any plans there.
Yeah, so we're going to do something very similar to what Suzanne, Jerry, and Tori mentioned. I think one thing that I do want to say is that all of the principals have been talking with one another throughout all of our planning to be sure that we're not causing a hardship for families if Maple is doing something different than Mountain View. So all of our planning has been working together to make sure that we can make something as easy and accommodating for parents as we can. But we're looking to do exactly what Suzanne had mentioned. So we are going to have all of our doors. We'll be using 4 separate entrances and exits for our students. Everything will be labeled. We will be making a video tutorial that we'll be sending out to all of our students and parents prior to the first day of school to let them know exactly how everything is going to work. And I anticipate our traffic actually being a little bit better than it normally is because of the systems that we're going to be putting in place.
Thank you, Wendy. As one of the folks on Facebook, and I guess I'll take this one, although Kim, you could, but I'll take it. And that was, what are we doing with parking passes for high school students? Well, we made that decision this week that we ordinarily have a $100 parking fee to park at Goffstown High School. This year, we're going to lower that to $50. That takes into consideration a couple of things. We're not sure in terms of how things will go throughout the year. That $50 will be non-refundable. So recognizing that we did cut that price in half, hopefully that will encourage more students to participate with that, but also recognizing that that the revenues that we do get do support a position at Goffstown High School. So we're trying to be mindful of the fact that we are spending monies on PPE, a whole host of things. So we're trying to be cognizant of our revenue picture as well. So with that, there's been.
It's MC. I'm wondering, Brian, if it's worth mentioning that when parents drop off, that's going to look a little bit different than it has in the past in terms of parents won't be getting out of cars and going into the building. They won't be walking students into the building as they often have in the past on the first day of school. Brian, do you want to just speak to that briefly?
No, I would just concur. So this is not going to be a typical start of the school year where we might encourage, typically for our younger children, where we might encourage parents to make sure that they're feeling comfortable and they know where they're going. But yes, we certainly will be limiting the ability for the public to access our schools. We are opening our schools in what I'm calling a modified secure campus status, which means that visitors will be restricted. We simply don't want to increase the potential contaminated people might be coming in. So we're not going to be allowing parents in like we have been able to in the past.
All right. Here's another question that we have, and MC, this might be for you or perhaps Brian. Also, if we choose homeschooling versus remote learning, can we come back to the school if it fully opens up?
Well, the short answer to that is yes, and certainly we would welcome you back. But I might encourage parents, instead of choosing homeschooling, that it might be a better option for them to choose the remote only model. And they certainly, I think we would have some capacity to work with individual families, particularly at the elementary level, around expectations. I think teachers can be flexible. So we want to keep kids connected with us. It's education is a vital service we provide, and we want as many of our kids in our schools as we can. So it's really important for us to keep our families connected, to keep our kids connected. So I would encourage parents to consider that. But if they do choose to homeschool their children, the school district doesn't provide any services to them. We don't have to provide any materials or anything like that. So we would certainly encourage you to stay with us. But if families make that choice, and that's certainly their choice to make, they would be able to re-enroll at a later point in time, Scott.
All right. We did get some feedback, Brian, that your microphone, if you could make it louder, from some folks who are out there listening to it. Kim, you wanted to add something regarding high school, the parking pass situation?
Yeah, just one last note on parking at the high school. When you get your selection survey in the next couple of days, there is a question on there specific to interest in purchasing a parking sticker. And what we are hoping is we'll get an idea of really what the actual interest is, number of licensed drivers with access on a regular basis to cars. That's going to let us look at exactly what that interest is, how many spaces we have, and how we can maximize parking on campus. And then we'll get information out to families about making those purchases and distributing the stickers.
All right, thank you. So this is going to go, Suzanne, I'm going to pick on you on this one. Will the remote only model incorporate synchronous and asynchronous learning models, specifically at the elementary school level?
Yes, is the short answer. The remote only or 100% connected learning at the elementary level, and I think it probably goes across all of ours, will have a schedule. It will be more rigorous than what we had before. So they will be on a schedule, and they will actually tune in with the teacher, and there will be assignments on our, for elementary, it's the Seesaw platform at Maple Avenue in Bartlett.
All right, so Adam, I'm going to ask you to.
Can I jump in on this for just a second?
Sure.
I would direct parents and listeners to the SAU 19 website, where the presentation to the SAU board from the other night is it's there. And in that presentation is where administration has provided a lot more detail as to what a connected learning model looks like, what the hybrid model looks like. So folks can readily access those slides and at each level for each building, learn more there as well.
Scott, may I also jump in real quick, if you wouldn't
Sure.
mind? So I actually received a few emails from a couple of parents during my presentation the other evening. I shared a sample student schedule for Fridays when we're all in the remote model. And a couple parents had shared that they're worried about sharing devices and not being able to have two children on at the same time. So yes, we're of course are recommending for students to get into those live sessions with their teachers. However, we understand at Mountain View that on Fridays, if they have a high school student who has a biology class that's happening at the same time, that might be a hardship. So we are going to be pre-recording videos that will be in our Google Classroom along with activities for students to be able to complete, so that if that schedule doesn't work for families, there will be another option at Mountain View, because we want to make sure that we're being able to accommodate and be flexible in those situations. So I did receive a few emails about that today, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned it to the community.
All right. Adam, if you'd be kind enough, if you can bring up question number 2, and I'm going to read that. What is the process for requesting a different cohort? We need this for our child care reasons. And is there anybody who wants to tackle that one?
I'll take it, Scott. Okay. So first of all, I would say let me do an intro, and then MC, you can speak to this. I think that we certainly recognize that this is a very challenging set of circumstances for parents. So we know that choosing the model that we did, we feel this is the safest way for us to reopen our schools, given the size, given the age, given the limitations of space. But we recognize that it will be a hardship for parents to find childcare, to find support. So I really, my heart goes out to all parents, particularly parents with young children. We certainly recognize that this is a hardship. So part of the process that we will be sending out a selection survey, and parents will be able to identify that they are requesting a different cohort. So what that's going to mean is we're not going to allow cohort changes for things like I want to be with my friends. But if we have families that might have different last names, we want to keep those people on the same schedule. And there could be unique circumstances that individual families may have. But MC, you want to speak a little further to that?
Well, for the last probably couple of days, Brian, since you announced that the selection survey was going to be deployed out to parents, administrators have been going through the surveys, looking at different levels, because obviously the information that we need to collect is different. Case in point, Kim was talking about parking passes. We don't need that same information for the elementary schools. So we are fine tuning that document. I think it's in the final stages of being revised, ready to go. And Brian, is it fair to say that it will be deployed tomorrow?
We hope to, MC. It's certainly, we have a few final touches, but barring any unforeseen issues that come up, it is our intent to release that either tomorrow or by Friday.
All right, this one, Adam, no need for a graphic. I'm just going to talk about it. We did receive a lot of inquiries about devices, and I did speak with our IT director, Steve Bourget. So last March, we did provide certain devices to students who needed them. That would be Chromebooks primarily. We are in a position to provide Chromebooks to families, but we are not able to provide a one-to-one device ratio. So we are going to be putting forward a recommendation or a list of devices that you might find helpful to purchase for parents. That could be anywhere from Chromebooks to inexpensive laptops, and Steve is going to prepare a list of those devices for you. Again, we're not endorsing any type of manufacturer or product, but it might help you in terms of selecting and making your decision. For those parents who need it, we are going to be in the next couple of weeks. If there is a need for a loaner device, we will be able to assist families with that. but more than likely it would be, one device per family. I wanted, while we're on that topic of devices, one of the questions that I also had seen was, would kids be expected to bring, a device back and forth? And it was my understanding, and I guess I'll give this one to you, Jerry, but for the most part, when kids are in school on a hybrid, we would expect that interaction with their teacher, right? And not necessarily having a Chromebook. Is that fair enough to say?
Right. We will still have some computers in school to teach them how to use Seesaw and things like that, but we're going to do as much direct teaching as we can. Someone had asked about small groups too. Teachers are very creative. They're going to have small groups socially distanced in one section of the classroom, doing direct instruction with the students, teaching, letting the students learn, and really making the most of our time together, not having them on the computer when they're in school.
Thanks, Jerry. Adam,
Scott, if I might, another thing relative to small group instruction, because I know that parents have asked a little bit about this. We have these really nifty plexiglass dividers that actually we've been trying out ourselves. They used it the other night at the SAU board meeting. So if you're wondering how might a teacher sit with a small group of kids at a table, these plexiglass dividers will be in place. So if a student has their mask and is separated by a plexiglass divider, it would allow, if the table spacing is correct, and Brian, weigh in on this one, I do believe that having the plexiglass piece allows you to shorten the social distancing in between two kids a little bit because it's a barrier. And that is how our teachers will be working with small groups.
I would say that's accurate, but again, I would reiterate, we do not want kids on devices when they're in school. We want them face-to-face. We want them in small groups. We want them interacting. We do not want them staring at a screen. So Mrs. McCann, you might want to speak to this. This was something that you have a very strong opinion about that I completely concur.
I think we can all agree that our students have spent an inordinate amount of time since March on screens, both in terms of their educational time and for those of us who have kiddos in our households, a lot of their social interaction has been via devices as well over these last few months. And so as we move into getting students back in the classroom, Brian's correct. We're absolutely passionate about having those days be as tech-free and as interactive with their instructors and with their peers as is possible, really looking for them to have time to have discussions, to collaboratively problem solve, and to dig into the material.
Thanks, Ken.
And I would go, go ahead, I'm good.
Yeah, so one of the folks on Facebook said, are we going to be doing these types of sessions for individual schools? And that is the plan. So our plan is, you can comment on that?
Yeah, please let me speak to that. So the part of the presentation that we had on Monday evening, I spoke about our communications plan during COVID-19. It was during that time that I talked about the different communication methodologies that we will use, the types of circumstances in which we communicate, and I also shared the information about this session this evening. That evening, I also shared that as we get a little closer towards the start of school and more logistics are worked out, each school will do a very similar session to this. So it will be way more specificity and nuts and bolts for each specific school, Scott, but that is part of what we presented on Monday evening.
All right, Adam, would you be kind enough to bring up question number 9? And I'm going to read this question. This is for Brian. Why are you changing the school calendar now? This is very confusing and creates problems for parents in terms of scheduling.
Really, the biggest thing, Scott, is just, I believe it was last week, Governor Sununu gave New Hampshire school districts a little flexibility that we had not had previous to that. The governor allowed us to use 3 days in our school calendar specifically for professional development and to allow schools to get ready for the reopening of schools. So what we did, Scott, was we went from a 180-day instructional school year. We dropped that by 3 days and went to 177 school days. And we put 3 days at the start of the school year for additional professional development to make sure all of our teachers, all of our support staff are ready to go. So we slightly adjusted that. And Scott, I would just remind everyone that this year we have a state primary the day after Labor Day, which is also a little unique. So that's a non-school day for us. We're not in school because 3 of our schools in Goffstown and New Boston are the polling locations for our towns.
All right, this next one, MC, is going your way. This is also from Facebook. It may seem silly, but are we able to choose different options for multiple children? Example, my senior can handle remote early, but my first grader, I believe, needs to be in school. Can I make that decision if I decide to?
Yes,
All right,
yes,
you do have that
parents,
choice.
yes.
And folks, I just want to remind everybody, there's a lot of questions that are coming on through Facebook. We won't be able to get to every single one of them. There are literally probably 200 questions, both that we received via email that are on here, but we're going to make our best attempt to try to get to a lot of these questions. Adam, would you mind bringing up question 13 for me? And the question here was, can stay-at-home parents work with other families to help with childcare situations? And I'm going to tackle this one myself. I've been working with, as Brian, you mentioned, I was working with the YMCA. We're also having some preliminary discussions with the Recs department in New Boston. But today, while I was looking for social media comments to see what are some of the questions that the communities have, childcare is a very big one. What really kind of touched my heart was that there were at least 2, if not 3 community members who have been talking about, I can take 3 kids on Mondays and Wednesdays. Well, I can take 2 kids on this day. And I reached out to both of those individuals. I'm going to speak with them tomorrow. But I guess my ask of the Goffstown and New Boston communities is that we really need the help of the community here. So whether it's PTAs, PFTs, other parent groups, church groups, you name it. We really, really could use your help. And I think the community needs everyone's help in terms of trying to make this work out. Childcare is something that we know is an issue, but we think that if we rally around the community rallies around this, I think that there are some really good viable options, for everyone. So I'll have those conversations and hopefully we will have leaders emerge in New Boston and Goffstown who can really help the school district and our general community solve what we know is a challenge. Brian, I'm going to turn question number, I believe it's 14, over to you. And I'm going to read it. It says, what additional measures will you be putting into place to help students manage and cope with their anxiety beyond the curriculum that is currently in place for social economic learning?
I think you mean social emotional learning, Scott.
Sorry,
yeah, no, that's
I'm
fine.
the finance guy. That's why I said
you pay the bills. You're the money guy. We know. That's okay. Well, first of all, I'd say that is a terrific question. And one of the biggest concerns that I have had and continue to have is what is the emotional status of all of our kids? And by the way, our parents too. This is an incredibly challenging time for everybody. There's much uncertainty. I think that there's a lot of anxiety. People are nervous. People are unsure what things look like. People are scared. And really, Scott, it's hard to learn in the presence of fear. So we need to make sure that everyone is well taken care of, that their social emotional needs are being met. I'm going to ask Mrs. Berry to speak to this as well. But one of the things that we put into the reopening framework, and this was something that Mrs. Berry knew was really important to me, I asked her to develop a comprehensive social emotional learning plan. And by the way, we've been doing this work for a long time, about a couple of years now at this point. But I asked her to kind of step it up and to work with our educators to make sure that we have a comprehensive plan to meet the social emotional needs of all of our kids. Mrs. Berry?
Thank you, Brian. Yes, the principals have all worked together. The reopening framework that the superintendent developed was further developed by each school. There's a social emotional learning plan for each school to address students as well as staff as we re-enter what our new world is going to be like in the buildings. I think one of the things to remember is that our teachers are very aware that the class of students that they had last year, they had those students with them until March. They knew their kids very well. So maintaining an online relationship, a presence, an empathy, a caring, was not necessarily easy, but they knew the children and they were able to do that. This year, they're going to have a brand new set of children in front of them. And I can see, you can't see her, but I can see the principals, they're all nodding their heads and saying, yeah, our teachers have to develop relationships with these kids and they are developing lessons. They're working in teams. They're very concerned about how to take the work that our teachers did last year, not only with their students, but the learning that they had themselves, and create lessons and plan to meet kids where they are and then move them forward. So this is foremost in our hearts and absolutely in our minds as we look to plan for this school year.
All right, Brian, I'm going to read it to you, a question that came through Facebook. Are we going to be notified if there are confirmed cases within the school or classroom? I understand we cannot receive specific identities for privacy, but knowing there's been exposure is part of what affects choice to pull kids out of perhaps the hybrid type model, the in-person model.
Well, the short version on that, what we're able to disclose, what information we're able to share with the community is dictated by the Department of Health and Human Services. So I would say it would certainly be my intent to be able to share as much detail as I possibly could if we had a potential case or a suspected case of COVID-19. But Scott, let me bring everyone back to the spring. And everyone will remember we had a case in the spring that we had a positive case in SAU 19. And at that time, and granted, we're in a different place in the pandemic, and hopefully the protocols from Health and Human Services might be a little more enhanced at this point. But at that time, Scott, I couldn't even tell people which school district it was. That was incredibly troubling to many, many people. I got an awful lot of calls and emails. I'm very sorry, but people need to know the information that is given out and disseminated to the community is dictated by the Department of Health and Human Services. So if I was able to say we had a student who tested positive, this was a second grade student at Maple Ave School, and everyone else at this point, you should know that unless your child interacted with this child, you don't have to worry. And that the Department of Health and Human Services, through their contact tracing process, will notify you if they believe that your child might have been at risk. We can't give that level of detail, Scott. I wish I could. And people, please understand, I will tell you as much as I possibly can, but saying more than Health and Human Services tells us we can is something that is a potential liability issue. And so people, please understand, I'm going to tell you everything I can. And when I can't tell you, I'm going to tell you, I'm really sorry. I know this stinks, but I can't give you any more information than that.
All right, I appreciate that, Brian. I think a lot of folks, you know, they do understand that there are limitations. I think it's just good to clarify that. So Adam McCune, who is our coordinator at GTV, suggested, which is a great one, folks, is that if you think a particular question is one that's very compelling, please like it, and I will see that on my cell phone. So I'm going to ask a question that I believe we should be answering, and that is, can you please explain how the full remote option will have their days structured, whether that be Zooms, pre-recorded sessions, et cetera? Folks need to make a choice, I guess, relatively soon. So I'll throw that out to anyone on that one.
Well, Scott, let me just say that was part of our presentation. So I would encourage people to go and take a look at the PowerPoint that's posted on the SAU 19 website. At the beginning of that presentation, there are links to documents for the high school, and there are slides that show a continuum as well as some of the expectations around the different learning models. But why don't we start with the high school and have Mrs. McCann provide a little insight to that, and then briefly maybe Mrs. Kohler, and then one of the elementary principals.
Yeah, really brief, I think, for each school would be good.
Scott, and just a clarification, this is for families who, in lieu of the hybrid, are choosing the 100% remote model,
That's
not
correct.
if the full school is in it?
Correct.
Yeah, so
Right.
if families are choosing the 100% remote model, our intention is that we will have teachers in the building who will have in-person classes but they may also have a section of students who are in that fully remote scenario, in which case we're going to look to structure the time that those classes would meet right within the high school schedule. And we would anticipate that you would have synchronous classes at least twice a week for each class period that you have. So kind of following the traditional high school odd even schedule over the course of a week.
And can we pivot over to Wendy at Mountain View?
Sure, thank you, Scott. So part of this, Scott, is waiting for some of the numbers to come in from that parent survey that's coming out, because I think how many synchronous classes that we're going to be able to offer is going to depend on the number of students and what grade levels that are coming in from families. However, like I had mentioned earlier, it's really important to mention that regardless if we're having synchronous classes or for families that are choosing hybrid and are looking for instruction, we are going to have pre-recorded videos made by certified professionals that are going to be available in our Google Classroom. So even if for some classes we're not able to offer something synchronous, you are going to have the opportunity to be able to watch instruction. We also at Mountain View, for those families that are choosing full remote or on their connected learning days, are going to have a help desk that's available for families. So if they're having issues that have to do with technology, they're not going to have to wait for a teacher who is live teaching in the building to be able to get back to them. We're going to have people that are going to be available to be able to answer that so that families aren't frustrated at home if they happen to be having some difficulties.
All right, and how about Jerry? Why don't you tackle this for the elementary schools, if you don't mind?
Sure. So we're going to mirror what we do for the hybrid model. And when we are back in school, hopefully even more than that. So basically teachers will have synchronous classes for the students to attend, but we do understand that some families are not able to log in, or grandparents are watching their children. So we will also have some recorded videos, some instructional videos that they can access and use the Seesaw platform. But it should be basically the same experience as if they are choosing the hybrid model at the elementary level.
And Tori, you have anything to add for New Boston?
Yeah, I would say that, we're looking for teachers to have, in the remote model, to be able to do direct instruction through a Zoom platform. Not only that, they'll have office hours as well, so that families can be able to call and get kids real time. And the teachers will be connecting with the kids on a regular basis, so that their their instruction is not going to be only through video, that they're going to be connected to the teacher that has been assigned to that remote model for their grade level.
And Tori, while I have you, there were some questions regarding special education, and one of them was, how will OT, PT, speech services be provided in school and perhaps out of school?
Our intent is that the students will be receiving the services that are outlined in their individual education plan. Some students did very well with some of those services being presented via Zoom, so they may be getting some of their services on their stay-at-home day, whether that's remote or part of the hybrid model, and some of the students will be receiving direct services while they're in the building. So it really is going to be the case managers working closely with families and looking at the model that is best for their student.
All right, MC, this next one is coming your way. I know that I botched the emotional economic thing, but social emotional curriculum aside, how will you approach ensuring the environment is not too rigid and allows for fun, breaks, and letting loose, especially with a restrictive environment, particularly for our elementary school students? It's a great question.
It is a great question. And I have two grandsons who are 8 and 5, who bring a very physical joy to life every time that we're around them. And we are well aware from pre-K all the way up through high schoolers, as well as ourselves, that movement is a part of what we do. And one of the things that I have learned over the years in my work with our superintendent is the importance of motor breaks, the importance of movement. We talk about this all the time. as an administrative team, when we were looking at how do you do this? How do you put kids in a room? How do you tell them you have to move within your space? How do you get a wiggle break, if you will? Teachers will be using little things that kids can do. You know, you can move in your chair, you can move your feet. Our Unified Arts folks, their group, it's called NAPPERD for PE, has produced a document that helps for movement in pretty restrictive places. So how can a student stand behind a chair, right? And maybe do lifts up and down with themselves on a chair. We absolutely understand. And it is actually one of the tenets of our instructional model that within every 15 to 20 minutes, regardless of the age of the student, that there is some kind of a motor movement, some kind of break. So
no, MC, it's so interesting, and I'm going to share this, and I hope I don't embarrass my boss, too much, Superintendent Balke. But so we were in the media center. We've been planning this for weeks, and so Brian is actually at the table next to me, and I look over and I don't see him, and then all of a sudden I look towards the ground and he's doing push-ups, and so I think young kids aside, I mean, here's a grown man. He's doing push-ups because he needs that relief. So I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, Brian, but I wouldn't want, and you did a lot of them, which kind of was impressive. I honestly didn't think that you had it in you, but that's besides the point. So Kim,
Scott, if I could add, we're not rigid human beings as adults. And so we're in elementary schools. I'll speak for the elementary schools. We want to have as much fun as the kids. So we are not looking to create environments that are so rigid that the kids are not going to be able to have fun while they're at school. That's not going to be in their teachers' makeup, that's not going to be in their teachers' ability. So that is something that we live and breathe every day in our careers, and that is not something that is going to change because we've had to put in some safety features. So I think that we're going to be looking to do the best that we can by the students that are going to be in our classrooms.
And Wendy, I assume same thing with you.
Absolutely.
At Mountain View.
Absolutely. I think part of teaching is gaining a rapport with your students, and whether that's through humor, sharing similar interests, you're making connections, and that isn't going to go away. It doesn't matter if there's less desks in the room. I think one of the things that we've talked about as a staff is when you walk into Mountain View, it's still going to be a very warm, inviting environment. Our bulletin board's up, student work is going to be up, posted in our classrooms. So none of that is going to change, and our teachers are excited to get kids back in the building and to make those connections. So, we're really excited about it. And we think that we've got some really great things planned for the fall.
All right, I'm going to do a speed round here. Are dividers provided for each student in the classroom or only for small group areas? Anybody want to take that one? High school, how about you? Kim?
Yes, Scott, what we've done is a little different than the other schools, because remember, our students are not spending all day in one classroom. High school students will be moving. There'll be 3 transition points. They'll have 4 classes over the course of the day. So our concern with looking at dividers was putting one student behind one immediately after the other. So we are not going with dividers. We're going with the 6 feet of distance between the students. We're very comfortable with the size of our rooms, that students will be appropriately spread out.
This is a speed date, Kim, so we're gonna.
Sorry.
Gary, what about you?
Sorry, did you say me?
Yes, what about
Yes,
Bartlett?
okay. Yes, so we've set up our classrooms. Teachers have been in this week and they're coming in next week. We're getting rid of lots of the furniture. They're storing materials. There's a lot more.
Desk shields and dividers.
Well, we're going to try. We have them. We can use them if we need them. There's going to be enough space for students to not need them, we will put them in small group areas for speed.
Where needed, you'll have them. Is that safe to say for all of the schools?
Yes.
All right. One of the questions was, when will bus routes and schedules be made available? This is a challenging one. That's why we're doing our survey. We might have to adjust bus routes. So I think this is one where we need flexibility from the community. I would expect it to be probably late August because, again, this is going to take a lot of juggling around. Another question came in about transportation and had to do with, will the buses go to some of the daycare centers or childcare centers in New Boston and to the Y in Goffstown? The answer to that is unfortunately we cannot do that. So it'll be a parent's responsibility to transport their student from, say, New Boston School to one of those facilities or from a Goffstown facility. One of the questions that I want to get to, Adam, if you wouldn't mind, again, it's a quick one. It's question number 46. Again, what about student photos and senior pictures for yearbooks? And this really kind of goes to like all the other things that we do in our schools. With regard to photos, that is on hold for now. We would encourage students, seniors in particular, to stay tuned to information that you get from the Goffstown High School administration. I hope you can understand that we're dealing with some very, very big, large issues, and I'm not trying to at all diminish the school photos, but it's just something that we're going to have to put on the back burner for now. We do have photographs for ID purposes for kids already in our system, with the exception of perhaps some of the new kids that have come into the district and or our younger ones. Kim, there was question number 47, if you would tackle that. And it was, no one ever responded about the free SATs that were once offered at the school. Are there any updates on that? And will anything change with standardized tests or testing?
Yes, so we are scheduled. The state is committed to providing an SAT for the class of 2021 at free of charge to families. October 14th, Wednesday, October 14th, we will be administering the SAT on that day. It's also our intention that day we will have the 9th graders in the building, and they will take the PSAT 8-9. And 2 weeks later, on October 28th, the PSAT will be administered to all 10th and 11th graders.
All right, Adam, could you go to question number 36? And this one is going to go to Superintendent Balke. What happens if a teacher gets sick? Does the whole class get quarantined? Will a different teacher be brought in?
Well, if a teacher gets sick, certainly that teacher is going to need to be isolated, will need to be quarantined, and we would have to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to identify whether the entire class might need to quarantine and isolate for a duration of time. Interestingly, Scott, I've participated in a lot of calls and a lot of sessions with Dr. Chan, who is our state epidemiologist, and he's described scenarios where that may not be necessary. And so it really depends on the proximity. It depends on the duration of potential exposure to the virus. So the short answer is certainly the teacher would be removed from that classroom, and we would want that teacher to have time to rest, to recover, to receive appropriate and adequate medical treatment. And yes, another teacher would be brought in. It could be that the entire class would need to be quarantined. But Scott, given the information that Dr. Chan has been sharing, I don't think that's probably likely. I think the requirements for quarantine, for example, Dr. Chan had shared that if one child had tested positive for COVID, that it may not even be necessary for other kids within the family to be tested. So we don't really have all the details about that, but certainly the teacher would not be with us and a new teacher would be brought in. And then based upon the recommendation from our public health officials, we would make further determinations about those other children in the class.
Thank you, Brian. This one is a really nice one, and I want to acknowledge it. The question is SAU expecting there to be a need for additional devices, Chromebooks, that they don't already have? Would it be helpful for those of us who are able to donate some to get additional devices, or would you consider a GoFundMe fundraiser? Unfortunately, our school district policy does not allow for that type of GoFundMe. We can't do it from a school district perspective, nor do we, but any individual community member who wants to make a donation to a school or to an individual, we would gladly accept that. And if there's any type of effort that a community group wishes to make that would help students and families who need these devices, that would be greatly appreciated. And I just think that's a wonderful, wonderful gesture on that gentleman's part.
Scott,
yes,
it's MC. If someone was interested in doing something like that, Scott, who would they contact? Because people are not eligible right now to just show up at a school building and drop equipment off or find someone to talk to. So who would you suggest they reach out to?
If it's IT equipment, I think it would probably be our IT director, Steve Bourget, making sure, we want to make sure that whatever is being purchased or donated would be, kind of compatible with our systems. if it's something that's large scale, you can contact me, Scott Gross, at the business office, and I'll be more than happy to help you. Again, really, I think this is really what it takes, and the community really needs to step up. There are a lot of different issues between transportation, childcare, devices. It's something that obviously is going to need everyone's attention. Adam, could you bring up question number 40? It has to do with schedules, and I'm going to read it. We are being asked to commit to a schooling choice month to month, and thank you for that flexibility. If cases begin to tick up, or if we hear about a positive case in our child's classroom, what options do we have to pull our children back into remote learning immediately, and will that be allowed?
So I'll take that one, Scott. This is one that I do feel strongly about. A lot of our other neighboring school districts are making parents make a choice for the entire first semester or the entire first grading period. I think that's just simply too much of a gamble for parents. I think the circumstances continue to evolve and change very quickly. So we have allowed for a whatever you choose, if you choose to be in a fully remote model, or if you choose to be in the hybrid model, you would be making that choice for a month. And then if you wanted to change that, we would allow you to do so. So yes, they could certainly do that. And Scott, I should also mention, I don't think this came up, but we certainly talked about this at each of the respective school board meetings. We do hope to be able to allow more kids to come in with greater frequency. And the selection survey that we've mentioned a couple of times that will be going out is going to have a component on it for what I'm calling priority return. So if we have families that don't have support systems, they may not have the means to pay for childcare. They may be food insecure and really need kids in school so that they can get adequate nutrition. Whatever their unique circumstances are, we're going to give them the opportunity to self-identify. And then based on our numbers, we may be able to get some of those families back in sooner for greater duration of time. So this is something that we're really trying to do. Again, I said at the beginning, I recognize the hardship for families. And if we have the capacity, which I believe we're going to have some capacity, that we want to get some of our students who might struggle, certainly our special education students, we'd like to get in with greater frequency of time in our schools. And that's really important for us to be able to do that. I would ask respectfully that if you're a family that you want your kids back in school as much as possible, and you have means, you have childcare, you have systems, you have support, you have a network, I would ask you, please don't select that, because it means that I'm probably not going to be able to give that seat to someone else who might need it more.
All right, Brian, I'm going to stay with you on this one. If total remote is chosen, can a child with an IEP get services in person?
I would say yes. So that's a little bit of a unique scenario. But if a family wants their child to be primarily in a remote environment, which we call connected learning, and they wanted to come in for some specialized special education services, we could certainly work that out through the special ed department.
All right. And one of the other questions that we got, any more thought online on live streaming for the kids on their devices while at home? This way they can feel like they're part of the class and continuous learning could happen. Would there be money for bandwidth increases from pandemic funding? I think I can take that one. I spoke to our IT director this afternoon about this, and we were talking about the ability to kind of stream back and forth, and cameras in classrooms was an issue. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are New Hampshire statutes that specifically address cameras in classrooms, video cameras, correct?
Yeah, this one's a little tricky, Scott, and you get into some of the privacy statutes in New Hampshire. You get into, and by the way, video with audio is different than video alone. And so when we think about, there are certain provisions in federal law that restrict video and audio. So this one is complicated. We certainly want to do everything we can to provide those services to our kids, but the live streaming in a classroom is a challenge. And it's also something that we would need to address with our 4 unions.
All right, the next question, Adam, would you be kind enough to bring up question number 6? And Suzanne, we're going to bring this one over to you, and only because it uses the word cubby. Will lockers or cubby Will lockers or cubbies in the classroom be used, or will all belongings be expected to remain with them traveling between classes? And that could be for Mountain View as well. So what's the expectation for kids and their belongings?
So we will have them use the hooks outside the classroom for their coats and backpacks because we can separate those with a smaller cohort. As far as their materials in the classroom, our generous PFT purchased containers for every student. So depending on your cohort, you will have your container at your table, and your materials will stay there, and they'll close at the end of the day and be stacked, and then the next cohort's materials will be out for them.
And Wendy, what about Mountain View? What will that look like?
So at Mountain View, we don't anticipate using our lockers or our cubbies to start the year just because of how we are socially distancing our desks in the classroom. However, a number of the classrooms have full tables that are set up, so students will have an area that's next to them to be able to put their books on the table. We also are going to be reaching out to parents because we know that we are putting up our supply list, and not all of those supplies are going to need to come to the building daily. So we don't want children overloaded with things in their backpacks. So we're going to be in contact with families about what can stay at home and what papers will go in and help with organization at home and what will be coming to school. But at least to start the year, we're not going to be using our lockers or cubbies at first.
All right, and I assume high school, they pretty much have their backpacks, right? Right,
Yeah,
Kim?
no lockers, but remember, they're only having either their odd or their even day classes. So we're not asking them to carry everything. It's just what they need for that scheduled day.
All right, the next question, and hope I'm not putting you on the spot, MCs. I know that you're not a registered nurse, but you have been working with the nurses throughout this issue. If a child who isn't feeling well, not COVID related, what will be the protocol before being allowed back to school for in-school learning? Do we have that? Do we know that yet?
We're still working on that, Scott. We're still working to get some protocols. The school nurses meet via a Zoom call weekly with Dr. Chen. The State School Nurses Association is a very active group. They are in the process, we understand, of developing a protocol that we're hoping is going to come down from the state as to what steps need to be followed. The interesting thing is when a student presents with symptoms, we can't tell if those symptoms are going to be COVID related or not. So I think, from my understanding at this point, is that most symptoms will be treated as though they are potentially COVID, and students will be isolated. Each school does have an isolation room for this purpose, and students, parents will be called, students will be sent home. And then Brian, you and I, we had a conversation with the nurses about this the other day, about what would be the requirement to come back.
Well, so I'm not going to commit to a specific duration of time, but it's fair to say that if your child goes home and presents with any kind of COVID-looking symptoms, that there will be expectations prior to their return that will be different and more enhanced than in the past. And look at everyone, this is going to be tricky because we're dealing with a global pandemic, and during this, we're going to have the influenza season, we're going to have the regular flu, we're going to have kids that have seasonal allergies. And let's not forget, kids are going to get the old regular, good old-fashioned common cold as well. So we're going to treat the symptoms perhaps a little more stringently than we have in the past, but we really all need to work together. You know, Scott, you mentioned earlier that this is going to take a community effort. This is not going to be the time for a parent who wakes up, their kid has 100.5 fever, to give them a dose of Motrin and send them to school. So we are really hoping and expecting that if kids are ill, they need to be out of school for the safety of everyone. If staff are ill, they are going to need to be out for the greater good.
All right, Brian, I'm going to stick with you on this question. My son has an IEP and receives extra help in reading. This all ended in March. He's falling further behind in reading. How is he going to get these services in just 2 days at school?
Great question. So first of all, the special education support services will also be on those connected learning days. So special education services will be provided in the schools when kids are in schools, but also on those remote only days. I'd also like to share part of what we put in place, Scott, is we're offering some additional tutoring services that can occur before and after school for any student who might need extra support. So we're mindful that some of our students and some of our most vulnerable learners have struggled and have likely fallen behind, and we want to help get them caught back up.
You know, I think another thing that we have a plea for the community is we really could use help. For those of you who would like to be substitute teachers, you know, we definitely could use your help. We posted that notice on all of our social media, off our Facebook pages. So if those of you can be substitute teachers, we would greatly appreciate that. In speaking with Goffstown Truck Center, or STA, they are desperately looking for folks to drive school buses. So I would say that, you know, this is going to take a community effort, and for those of you who can contribute by being a substitute teacher, by helping the school district, by being a bus driver, all of these things are going to be critical in the months ahead. We're going to be kind of winding down over the next few minutes. We're going to go until about 8:30. One of the questions, Brian, was, are they eating lunch in the cafeteria or in the classes?
Everyone will eat in classrooms. So go back to that large school, large scale gathering, Scott. We simply can't have a large group of kids in one space. That's restricted at this point per CDC and state guidelines. So as such, we will have, as part of our cafeteria program, we'll have grab and go options. We'll have lunches delivered to classrooms so that kids will be in their classrooms and will be eating there. They can certainly sanitize, they can wash their hands, they can clean their desks down afterwards. But Scott, at this point, we just can't have large gatherings. We know that about the pandemic. And if you were to go to any of our cafeterias during any of our lunches, there are large groups of kids. And unfortunately, we just can't do that at this point in time.
All right, let me see if we have any other.
Scott, may I add to something
Sure.
that Brian had mentioned? I also want to mention for families that depend on us for breakfast, that we will have breakfast available at the doors for entrance for, I believe, all of our buildings. I don't want to speak for the other buildings and how they're doing it, but specifically at Mountain View, we're going to have a kiosk set up at all 4 of our entrances so that students will be able to grab their breakfast and bring it to their classrooms. So that will still be available for families as well.
Yeah, and Scott, to that point, for families that might have food insecurity, they would have access to meals on days that they're not on campus as well. So again, some of those logistics might not be quite worked out, but families that have food insecurity, we're deeply committed to helping them, and we will have additional supports, even if their kids are in a remote only day.
So Brian, I'm sorry, Adam, can you go to question number 8? And I know, Brian, that you addressed this on Monday, but maybe it just bears repeating. The question was, is there a way to accommodate families that have to work and those that can stay at home?
Well, Scott, that's a great question. And again, I'm incredibly sympathetic to that. I know that if this pandemic had happened when my wife and I had our kids when they were younger, this would have been a hardship for us. We don't have family in the area. We don't have an extensive support system like perhaps a lot of families do. So I mentioned that priority return, Scott. So let's just do a little bit of math here. If we take half our population and we're going to have half our kids in on a day, that assumes it's the entire half. The way that we're breaking this out is when families elect for a remote only model, that will be creating additional seats that we can potentially get some kids back in for increased days. I mentioned that priority return. That's how we're going to do this, Scott. So we won't know until we do the selection survey and get a sense of how many people truly are electing for a remote only model. But it's certainly my hope that, families, I've heard from doctors and nurses and people who are frontline workers that just simply don't have the capacity to work from home. But I would say this would be another plea of mine. If you have the capacity to have your kids have supports, please don't select that. priority return, because it does mean it's going to take a slot from someone else who might really need it more than your child.
Wendy, a question came in for Mountain View Middle School. Will MVMS students still change rooms for different classes, or will they be in the same room for the entire day?
So Scott, our 5th and 6th graders will be staying in one class for the entire day, with the exception of our unified arts classes, especially for our students when they're in physical education. Our phys ed teachers are going to try to get the kids outside as much as possible. Our 7th and 8th graders will be changing classes, and that's primarily because we have some different offerings, especially in, for example, mathematics. We have some different leveled math classes for some of our accelerated students, and we also offer Spanish, French, and some literacy courses as well. So at the 7th and 8th grade level, the cohorts will be moving just based on our class offerings. But at the 5th and 6th grade level, they'll be primarily in one classroom with the teachers moving classes instead.
Wendy, it's MC. Wendy,
Sure.
would you just speak briefly to the fact that you have staggered your transition times in between kids' movings? Because I just got a picture in my head of a bunch of kids leaving classrooms and being out in the hallway. So would you?
And before Wendy says it, I think we all probably saw photographs that were on cable news channels from school districts in other states. I think it was Georgia, and it was appalling to me that there were hallways that were crowded, they were packed, kids were not social distancing, they didn't have masks on. I want to reassure the community that is not what our schools are going to look like. We are being much more careful. We need to take care of the health of everyone in our community, and those images were deeply troubling to me, and that will not be permissible in SAU 19.
Yeah, MC, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So yes, we will be looking at our team schedules and staggering those. But to be honest with you, the way that our schedule is built, almost every section has times that differ by team when they're transitioning in the hallways anyways. But there are a few exceptions to that we will be looking at to try to make it so that our hallway traffic is not heavy. I also would like to mention that our PBIS committee is working at making signs for our hallways for traffic flow, with reminders for social distancing for our students. And we'll be creating some videos as well, with some nice reminders for our students of our expectations. So those are all things that we've thought of and are working on.
Kim, is the high school going to have similar one-way signs, if you will, similar to what Market Basket and other places have?
Yeah, so we're looking at putting midway strips in the middle of the hallway, encouraging everyone, you're staying tight to your right, you're moving, you're not congregating.
And our high school hallways are pretty wide. So the high school
especially after the flooring project and the removal of a lot of those old lockers, we're feeling we're in good shape.
I would agree.
All right, well, we're winding down. I wanted to thank all of you for participating on this panel, and I want to thank everybody in the Goffstown and New Boston communities who've been watching on Facebook, GTV's Facebook page, as well as its YouTube channel. This is an ongoing effort on part of the SAU 19 community to have discussions with you. As we talked about earlier, we're going to be doing these on an individual school basis in the weeks to come. So stay tuned, and you'll be able to get more of a question and answer, more detailed information from your school administrators in that fashion. So with that being said, Brian, I want to turn it over to you as superintendent of schools to to close this out and give us your final message.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Well, again, I would really thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for these great, thoughtful questions. Scott, I'm not looking at the social media feed, so I don't know how many questions we had. But if we didn't have the chance to get to all the questions, we can certainly do other sessions of these. We can put together some FAQ fact sheets that people could be able to read. So we've tried really hard. I hope everyone knows we've tried really hard to communicate with everyone, to share as much accurate, timely information as we can. And we would continue to do that. So thank you so much to everybody. Mr. Gross mentioned if you'd like to sub, please put your name in. We could really use it. If you would like to be a school bus driver, please contact the Goffstown Truck Center. We could really use it. So thank you so much. We have a wonderful community. We want to just do everything we can to have as normal a school year as we're able to, but still make sure that safety is and will always remain our most important priority. So thank you so much. And Scott, you did a great job. Thank you for moderating this panel. And if this is something that people enjoyed and was helpful and useful, I'm certainly happy to do it again. I offered to Adam to be in the studio to be able to respond to questions. Adam actually thought it would be a little easier to do this on Zoom. So we're all in our homes, but I'm happy to come back if there are just questions for me. I can mic up in the studio and I'll stay there and answer questions and whatever it takes. So thank you all. We appreciate your support and we will continue to get through this together. So I'd like to ask everyone, keep making good choices. If the numbers start spiking in Goffstown and New Boston, that's really going to impact our ability to get back to school safely. So I hope everyone's making good choices and let's keep everyone safe, please. Thank you so much, Scott. And I appreciate the chance to do this.
All right, so Adam, if you would turn off the feed, and we are